and welcome to our second panel of the day, which is in parallel session. So the idea with these panels is we wanted to just showcase some really great projects that had sort of different origin stories, if you will. One project that is a partnership between an artist and a university project. Another one that grew out of a university, but I'm going to be interested to see how, in opposition to said university, it might have ended up becoming. And another project that's a community-based project about history. And it's sort of the same balance upstairs with slightly different projects. So we're trying to just sort of showcase different kinds of public history projects, not just in terms of the topics, but also in terms of their relationship to the universities, or no relationship to universities at all. Maybe we'll decide which one's better. Not which project's better, yes. Which project's better, as in, which mode of working may be better. And so we've asked the panelists to share information about their projects, kind of left it wide open. They can let us know what the project was, a particular aspect of that project, perhaps reflect critically on that project, what worked, what didn't, nightmare experiences with university finance, for example. Whatever you really want to say. We just want to hear about your projects and hopefully get a conversation going between the projects and everyone in the audience about those sorts of things. So it only remains to me to introduce everyone on my handy sheet. So the first project we'll be looking at is the Grief series. That was run by Ellie Harrison with the help of Dr. Laura King at the University of Leeds. And Ellie Harrison is an artist living in Leeds and working internationally. She's the artistic director of the Grief series, a sequence of 7 arts projects that open up spaces to talk about bereavement. The Grief series is multi-sensory with audiences being engaged and with participants and co-creators. Informed by rigorous research with academics, clinicians, and the public, this series creates spaces where grief can be expressed openly through a range of empowering creative practices. Ellie lectures on her practice, writing articles, giving talks, performances, and workshops at universities internationally, including the University of the Arts London, Sorbonne Paris, and UAM Mexico City. And Laura King is an academic historian at the University of Leeds, working on histories of emotional relationships, families, and everyday life. She collaborates with all sorts of people and institutions, from family historians to artists like Ellie, and museums. And then next we're going to hear about the Uncomfortable Oxford project. Here representing that project is Olivia Durand and Paula Larsson, who are co-founders of Uncomfortable Oxford, an organization that researches and runs critical thinking activities in several cities across the UK. Its primary activities are discussion-based walking tours designed to raise questions about controversial histories, including legacies of empire, inequality, race, gender, and class discrimination. In addition to tours, the organization develops educational tools, including lesson plans, that's handy, podcasts, lectures, research articles, workshops, and self-guided tours. It organizes free public events in an effort to bridge gaps between universities and local communities. And finally, we'll hear from Cristal Cole, who started her career in the theater arts after graduating from Mount View Academy as an actress. She has performed on TV, the West End, and short films. After a lifelong passion for history and the arts, she founded Khem Productions, a nonprofit organization that strives to empower and inspire the Black community by retelling our forgotten history through theater. That sounds wonderful. I can't wait to hear all about it. And I think, Ellie, I'll bring up your slides and you're good to go.
Hi, I'm Ellie. As you said, I'm the artistic director of the Grief series, and I met Laura in December 2014. At a thing at Opera North, and we've been working together ever since. So I'm just going to do a fast and dirty overview of some of the projects that we've done together. So we've gathered participant responses in libraries, parks, and conferences. We've run time capsule workshops with children. We've run button making workshops with older people. We've run workshops with students on interdisciplinary collaboration. We've given papers at conferences. I love it, so cheesy. We've organised international conferences in old motorcycle showrooms that have turned into queer art spaces. We made a web project. We organised an international conference in an empty shop unit filled with Mexican paper sculpture with our collaborators from Mexico. We made a museum of memories in a vintage caravan that we renovated. It's a bit of George Clark's Amazing Spaces kind of vibe. And we collaborated with chefs to produce a series of immersive meal events. So yeah, we've done a fair old lot actually looking back on it. But I'll hand over to Laura, who can tell you a bit more about one of our projects that we use as an example.
Yeah.
Shall I?
I don't know. You stay there, and is that on? And actually, one of the things we didn't add on that list is we've written with Jess Hammett, who's been part of a lot of this work. We've written an article together, which we totally forgotten. Obviously, it was quite a lot of work as well. But yeah, this project, this picnic. So if you imagine yourselves sat in the glorious sunshine of the grounds of Cristal Abbey in Leeds, which is a medieval ruined abbey, and there was a brass band playing, there were lots of people sat around the grounds of the abbey. And what we did was, with an amazing restaurant called The Swine That Dines in Leeds, we put together a picnic. And how this worked, and you can kind of see the hamper here, is people opened their hamper, and as well as the food within it, there were stories attached to all the food items, and these were stories from my research. So there was a bottle of elderflower champagne, and that was based on an autobiography that I found in Leeds Library of a man who every June still continued to make elderflower champagne according to his aunt's recipe, in a kind of way of remembering her over and over. So you can kind of see the little stories attached to each of the items there. So every food item within this picnic was based on something that had come out of the research that I'd done. Yeah, it was totally wonderful. It was really beautiful food, but the kind of project that I could never have imagined doing as an academic historian, and Ellie and her team found a way to bring this research to life in the most amazing sensory way.
Thanks. Yeah, I think particularly when we're dealing with sensitive subject matter, bereavement, loss, and particularly traumatic loss, I think really carefully about the tactility of the artworks and how the beauty, rather than just being something fluffy, is a kind of emotional accessibility ramp into a subject matter and the audience, and a way of being radically gentle, I suppose. I also think all of the work that I make is participatory, and I think very carefully about the ethics of participation, and I guess how my approach might support the ethics work that universities do. So I use a model called the Fry's Consent Model, which was originally developed in a BDSM context, and then has been used in all sorts of other different contexts, as a model for getting consent from participants. So it's spelled F-R-I-E-S, like French fries. And the idea is that consent with participants is in place when it's freely given, reversible, informed. Some people say the E is enthusiastic. I tend to prefer engaged, particularly if you're talking about trauma with participants. Engaged feels more fitting, and specific. So I find that a really useful model when you're working with communities, so that they have all the information that they need to decide whether they want to be involved. I think quite often academic projects can go in, sort of try and transfer the knowledge from the academic or the institution to the participant, and it's like, how do we try and flatten those hierarchies and be as transparent as possible? And Laura's been a really fantastic collaborator. She's also very respectful of freelancers' time and the way that we work, so I really appreciate that in our collaborative work.
And I guess one of the things that why the collaboration has worked is that kind of co-learning throughout the project. And one of the big lessons was ethics. And you know, we all know the difference between what we write on an ethics form and the process of getting ethics consent and actually doing ethical work. And Ellie's been a really good person to learn from in that. So I'm just going to finish off by, I guess, one final thought from me of why this has worked so well is that it's been so much led by Ellie and the Grief series. So all of this work, I mean, there's so much more of Ellie in this than me, but it's all been kind of Ellie's project, Ellie's way of thinking, Ellie's kind of timeline, I guess, and hopefully mostly it's me finding ways to fit into that. And I think that artist-led approach has really worked for us. And part of that has meant, actually, what happens is that I don't think many people who've engaged with the Grief series would necessarily go, well, I've learnt loads about history from this. So you'll see from the picnic that the history's there, and in all of the work, the history is there in some ways, but nowhere is there a big timeline saying, here's what happened over time. And we did have a question when we applied for some HRC funding. One of the reviewers, who really liked the project, said, I think the research will get lost in this process. And we said that is exactly what we want to happen. We want the research to get lost. We don't want people to feel like they're having a lecture, but we want them to kind of go away having experienced something and felt something and maybe learned something, but that not to be kind of an over explicit thing. So I think that's partly why it's been really interesting and successful from my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today. So my name is Olivia, Durand, this is Paula, Larsson, and we're co-founders of Uncomfortable Oxford. And Uncomfortable Oxford is a social enterprise that runs walking tours and many other activities in Oxford and also Cambridge as of this year. So we're going to start by telling you a little bit about how we got started and our model, and then we'll give you a few examples of the things we do.
Next slide. So I guess we started originally, we met at a public engagement workshop, or public engagement with research workshop. Olivia and I had never met before, but sat beside each other. And as part of the workshop, the idea was to propose something to do for the public engagement. And I was working as a tour guide already in the city, and she'd just been on a post-colonial walking tour of Berlin, and so came up with the idea of doing some sort of kind of addressing the local legacies of colonialism in Oxford. And it was right on the heels of the Roseman's Fall movement really taking off that year. And so we proposed the idea, and there was a bit of a competition. We did not win that competition. We went off to separate areas of the world. I went back to Canada, she went to Ukraine. And then we ended up coming back, and we submitted, as part of that, a proposal to do it as part of one of the festivals in Oxford. And so we ended up coming back together and designing the tour after not talking for a long time. And we were like, we'll see how this goes. And I had submitted it to do every single day of the festival for 11 days straight. Olivia had never done the tours before, so it was quite straight on her voice really quickly. And they were 2.5-hour long tours originally, but they were shockingly very popular. So our first day we had about 10 people show up, and then the second day it was 15, and then it was 20, and 25, and 30, 45. On our final day we had 84 people show up. So it really just showed us there was a huge appetite for it, and we decided that, okay, well this was for a festival project, but how do we make this a sustainable and systemic intervention in the landscape? And so we decided to move into a permanent building of it as a social enterprise instead.
Next slide, please. So, yeah, so we, I guess, can you click one more time? Yeah, yes, there's one animation. Yes. So this is our beautiful map of Oxford, or Uncomfortable Oxford. It doesn't ask all the questions that you ask on tours, but it gives you kind of an idea of our approach. It's about kind of trying to look at the very typical, very overwritten, overrepresented landscape of Oxford and ask questions and trying to kind of challenge the traditional representation of the cityscape of Oxford. So you see a few kind of very well-known sites. You can see Carfax Tower, we can see the Oxford Castle, we can also see the side business school with a little, like a tiny piece of the arms dealing money that went into funding the building, and of course diamonds, West Coast, and other representations of Oxford. And this is, of course, this is a map by our fantastic illustrator, Katie Lacey, but this is also a representation of how we do the tours. The tours are not about pointing and shaming, it's not like a shame tour, it's a tour about, okay, how can we have those conversations on the streets? Next slide, please. Oh, our activities.
So our primary activity is walking tours. We run currently about 12 a week right now. There's 6 that are open public tours and about 6 private bookings generally. But we also realized quite quickly that the walking tours are great because it adds something people can do when they're in the city. Locals can come on. We have a great mix of people who come on the tours. But also, a lot of times there's just desire for more information. And so we started running blogs that kind of filled out some of the stories we were telling, so writing the academic research and making it really easily accessible to people. And then we saw that there was also a need for a history of the British Empire. Quite often a lot of people came on the tours and had never really got that information in school. So we started running a course on public lectures, basically open around the city, open spaces, a brief history of the British Empire as a public lecture. And we then started working in schools because there's lots of questions. Can we come and do workshops with schools? And then of course collaborations with museums because it was just a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of desire for these types of approaches. So our walking tours are kind of the core of what we do, but that funds everything else that we do within the community itself. And it's about kind of giving back to the community and working as much as we can with it.
Next slide, please. Many slides. Yes. So our approach consists of kind of 4 main points. So we could go on forever, but this is a short presentation. So first, our tours are discussion-based. So of course they're structured and they're kind of, we plan them out, but the goal of each stop is meant to ask people for their opinion, their input, so there's no 2 tours that are the same because we'll have different people in the group and different conversations and different perspectives that will feed into the general discussion happening during the tour. Secondly, they are educational. They are very well researched. They're researched by academics, by graduate students. They are academically written, but then they are translated into kind of normal language. We don't use jargon. We try to convey those complex histories on the street, so you cannot really use jargon if you're talking and there's like an ambulance going in the background, someone singing. But basically, the goal is also to share knowledge. They are also about barrier breaking. So we try to create bridges between institutions, university institutions, and local communities, but also with the tourism industry. And what's very interesting is that on each tour you'll have especially on the open tours, of course, a very diverse group of people. You have sometimes about a third of students, but then you have a third of community members and a third of tourists. And basically you have people who would normally not have conversations with each other. Local people will not necessarily talk to tourists, who will not necessarily talk to students, and they'll have conversations together about those uncomfortable topics. And finally, the fourth aspect is critical analysis. One of the goals of the tours is to equip participants with ways of challenging, questioning the landscape, so that they too can have those conversations with their friends and families in Oxford, but also in other places when they encounter statues, memorials, or other geographical barriers within the city. Next slide, please.
So I think yesterday we talked quite a bit about some of the challenges with academic engagement with research or with public and projects, and of course number 1 is funding. It's hard to do so, and we wanted to make this a sustainable, systematic intervention in the landscape, and how to do that when you have to continue funding it. We don't believe in free work. There's a lot of exploited free work in academia in general, especially community members, and so we're very strong against free work in general. And we basically started off with just an original grant of £500 to start the original tour for the festival. Then we decided to go to the social enterprise route, and we got a startup grant for that of $12,500. And then everything else now is through the sustainability of the tours themselves. So our guides are paid. They're usually creating work opportunities for international students, especially, usually who come in on very exploitative kind of moments where they have limitations to their visas, who are really hard to make sure their contracts are legal because they do get exploited quite often in the city itself, working against things they're not supposed to do because of the fact they have to earn money to be an international student here. And we also invest heavily in community. Our local designer is a community member who we work with. We work with community groups as well to sustain their projects. There's little really interesting projects going on in various communities across Oxford, where they do their own post-colonial approach to their local communities, and we invest in those and we help them produce resources. So we're trying to give back as much as we can. So anything that comes in goes right back out. Next slide, please.
Yes, meeting the team. So of course it started with just the 2 of us, and I cannot recommend enough having a partner when you start a project, because if it was just me on my own, I would have either crumbled or given up or just forgotten about it. I don't know, because we were also full-time PhD students when we started. But when it was just the 2 of us, it was also not enough. And turning our Castle Box into a social enterprise allowed us to hire people, to pay them, and then to really grow our team. So those are just a few of the people. There are anymore about 40 people on the team across now 2 cities, Oxford and Cambridge. And it is really fantastic because it brings in a lot of different expertise and perspectives. And each team member also comes sometimes with their own interests that we try to allow them pursuing through articles, but also new tour developments. We had someone who really enjoyed medieval history, and then we did create a medieval history tour of Oxford, kind of challenging cliches about medieval history. So it is really, there's a great value in having a large team, but of course in having a business model that allows you to pay your team for their time and effort. Next slide, please.
And just another note that we had a team member who researched ghost stories in India, and we're working on a ghost tour right now based on that research. So it does develop really well. It's great to support that. Other ways that we've expanded is through workshops. As we said, we do workshops now in schools, and we do workshops with conferences and with academics, training staff members of the National Trust, working with English Heritage, and we work with some of the local churches to train their volunteers as well, so that they can handle those conversations about in the church and where some of the money came from for some of the beautiful churches in Oxford, and who owned as well. There's a lot of individuals within the Anglican Church who were slave owners as well, so those histories need to be talked about. And if you can hit just one more there. We also have, again, we said we do a lot of these resources. So we've turned our public lecture series, A Brief Introduction to the British Empire, into a podcast. It's used in at least 3 different countries right now in classrooms as a teaching tool. And we have more podcasts kind of being developed, and we do publish as our articles and the teaching plans too. So we've been working with AHRC to develop certain kind of placements within our organization. And we had an educational coordinator who worked on lesson plans specifically for teachers who need to teach difficult histories in classrooms. And those will be publicly accessible on our website as soon as we launch the new website for the education side of things, which will be in January this year, or next year.
Yeah, and of course the pandemic was also a very big push in making us think differently about what we were doing, because suddenly we couldn't do walking tours for a very long time. So we did definitely have this kind of digital turn that was kind of forced upon us. But the exciting thing is that since we've been back on the streets since last summer, so as I already mentioned before, we kind of went beyond Oxford, and also with the help of AHRC, because of the student placements, we were able to also work with doctoral students at the University of Cambridge and develop our Castle of Cambridge, which was launched this April in the city, has been running throughout the summer, and now there's a Cambridge Empire tour which will be launching in October, and we're planning a collaboration with the Cambridge museums for that as well. And outside of and beyond that, we also support other like-minded projects. So there was a group in Dorset that is now called Dorset Uncovered. So they got in touch with us because they really wanted to create something, and we had a lot of meetings with them, what best practices and how they could do that in their own community. And it was very interesting because it's a bit of a different kind of dynamic. So it's a lot more rural rather than, and we mostly work in cities. But that was really great. And we also, through the pandemic, worked internationally with a group based in Kolkata, Immersive Trails, and we conducted virtual tours online with them, comparing memorials to Empire in Oxford and Kolkata. Next slide, and we're almost over.
So just another kind of moment here on the methodology to kind of show, you can expect, of course, some of these tours get a little tense sometimes. We are asking people's opinions, and you can have people from all over the world with very different opinions on statues, for instance, and there's a big statue we'll talk about as an example here. But we do question powerful statements as our technique for deflating tension within a circle of discussion. And it's really powerful to be in a circle of people you've never met face to face on the street. It really eradicates a lot of the kind of stuff you see online as far as the hate speech and the likelihood for someone to make a really strong, bold statement, because they suddenly have to justify it to 15 people they've never met who are going to question them pretty quickly too. So it's actually a really, really kind of empowering moment to go on a tour, and the guide usually is there mostly as moderator and can supplement information, but we ask for, is a co-production of knowledge. And we, with the discussion-based tours, have decentralized usually a walking tour is, I'm the guide, I know everything, let me show you around. But it's actually like, here we are at this stop. What do you see? What do you know about this first? And then if there's more information to be supplemented, the guide adds that information. But a lot of people know those histories already. We don't need to tell them their history. And so they're able to really talk to their own personal experiences, and it becomes really wonderful kind of sharing and learning and moving forward through uncomfortable conversations into something that can be quite productive.
Next slide, please. So just an example, quite a well-known example, which is the Rhodes statue in Oxford, which is part of Warwick College, on one of the main streets of Oxford. So just to give you an example of how we do it, we generally, when we get to the Rhodes statue, we have a group and we first ask them, what do they know about it? So first we collect the knowledge of the audience, and most people will have heard of it. Somehow they'll say there were protests, that some of them will know about the history of Rhodes in Southern Africa. And basically we give people a chance to kind of share what they know. And then we focus on the statue. We ask them, okay, what does it look like? Can you describe it? So we really try to get information about like the symbolism of the statue. Where is it located on a building? Where is it located in Oxford? On which street? Who is it standing above? So all those kind of questions to make people kind of come to their own conclusions. And then we provide the information, adapting it to, of course, some things have already been said, so kind of giving wider information about Rhodes, and then starting a conversation again about the impact of the statue in the present fabric of the city and why it is contested today. So it is very open-ended, and it is very much inviting everybody in the group to contribute their expertise.
So this is just some example of the open-ended questions we give. You can hit again, and then this is some photos of Rhodes statues. If you look at Rhodes, so just one kind of symbolism thing is the two columns beside him. It actually mirrors the church that's across the street on the street. And between the two columns of the church is Mary and Jesus. And Rhodes has specifically taken that symbolism and put himself in that space. So when you kind of point out little details like that, it's a really good conversation about like there is a lot of details here that have been put in consciously, and can we work through that as a group and see the symbolism, see the location. It's also way above you, as you can see it there in the middle. And so we talk about hierarchies and who's he standing above, literally an archbishop and king of England. So there's a lot of these details to talk about. But this is just one example of many. We ask lots of open-ended questions, and then let people kind of walk away and we go to the next stop. So if you want to just go to the end there.
Yeah, here's just our contacts. Okay. So basically, I would love to like hear a lot. We're looking forward to your question. Thank you so much for listening to us, and you can find all our work on our website, all the podcasts, all the teaching plans, which are all freely accessible. And we'd love to hear any suggestions, questions you might have, and chat with you a little bit further.
I just want to add
at the end.
one quick note: our designer is fantastic, and
yeah.
she loves to work with these kind of projects. So if you're looking for a designer for something, feel free to reach out. We would happily pass on our details.
Thank you.
So hi everyone, thank you so much for having me here today, and for the organisers as well of the event for having me. Yes, my name is Cristal Cole. I'm an actress, a workshop facilitator and a creator. Now I am also trying to do something else. I'm trying to empower and inspire the Black community by retelling their history through theatre. I'll tell you a bit more about how I got into that in a moment. So looking at history, I suppose, from an actor's standpoint, when you are creating a character, you need to create a backstory, so that when you step onto stage, that people can relate to you and they can, try and interact with you, I suppose. So just like these characters, we too obviously need to know our history and our backstory. And unfortunately, not everyone does know their history or backstory, for it being concealed or twisted in different ways, or just not shared. Really, is very much hidden. So this is me. That's about 7 years old. I just wanted to bring myself into the story and how this relates to Khem Productions getting started. So not only was I interested in theatre, but I was also interested in history. So I used to devour anything to do with history, documentaries, read books, go to the library, which we don't do so much these days, but go to the library. I learned about, obviously, Romans, the Greeks, the Tudor history, Norse mythology, any kind of history, I just devoured it. And then when it came to ancient Egyptian history, oh my goodness, I just absolutely devoured everything that I could possibly find about it. Because for once, my 7-year-old self was actually seeing faces that looked similar to mine, faces in the history books that could have been my ancestors. And so, I devoured everything that I could from that. And when I found out that obviously the Roman Empire took over from the ancient Egyptians and squashed it, I always wondered what happened to these people? You know, where did they go? What did they do after that? And I asked my mum, I asked my dad, you know, my teacher, the librarian again, what happened? And they were all quite dumbfounded, I suppose. It was quite met with a, don't really quite know. Well, we know that the African people were, you know, enslaved during the 1500s. It's like, okay, yeah, we know about that history, and then modern day history we also talk about. But for me, I always wondered, what about that time period in between, from ancient Egypt all the way up to the enslavement period? What happened? And it almost became like a taboo subject, with this information being hidden. And it, unbeknown to me at the time, obviously something that I reflected on getting older, created this void inside of me that just needed to be filled. And when I got older, this void started to kind of itch, I suppose, and I needed to find out about my history. I needed to find out where my ancestors were from and who they were, basically. And when I did find out about their rich history, there was so much to explore. And now I feel that it's imperative to be sharing this information, and especially with young people. When, so like saying with my 7-year-old self, if I had seen all of this history, I might have been a different person or grown up differently. So this is something that I'm trying to do now. So that's why I started Khem Productions. As mentioned earlier, Khem Productions is a non-profit organisation which aims to empower and inspire the Black community by retelling their history, primarily through theatre and plays. So the first play that I have had written is called Out of Time. It's written by a really talented writer called Ruben Messiah. He's a young Black playwright, and it tells the story of a 25th century time-travelling teacher, mouthful, that travels back to the 21st century to take her students back in time to actually see their history firsthand. And unfortunately, the teacher, Miss Cooper, she comes across a student called Grace, and Grace is quite a troublesome student, and she smashes the timepiece, and all of the timepieces gets shattered and scattered throughout history. And so then it's down to Miss Cooper and Grace to go back in time to find the timepieces and to restore our future. During the play as well, you'd also meet historical figures throughout different time periods, that are really influential to even the modern day society that we have today. So this is why I'd like to tour it to primarily primary schools, the end of primary school, so the years 5 and 6, and then the starting age of secondary school, so years 7 and 8. So I feel like this is quite a crucial time period where people are questioning, who am I, where am I going to see myself in the future, and what was my past? So that's primarily where I want to take it to. I would also like for after the play, so obviously the students will see the play, but then there to be workshops afterwards so that the students can actually really engage in the material that they've learned and not just see some of it and not take it in fully. So I was lucky enough to have a collaboration day with Toynbee Hall, and we'll see if this video works. It's just to show you what we did on that collaboration day. No.
We collaborated with Toynbee Hall this summer as a part of their Heritage Day series to bring Rewrite and Reclaim. At our Heritage Day, we had a series of workshops that people could attend, such as African dancing, amulet making, wearing traditional Moorish clothing, joining Hannibal's army. There was also a snippet of a live reading of our first play, Out of Time, which was really exciting to hear. And also a Black-owned market where you could talk and trade and make connections with like-minded individuals and support our Black community further.
Thanks. Also, as well, with the workshops, we had separate rooms designated for different time periods, and the historical characters that were running the workshops, they would also be stood outside of the room to then tell you information about themselves. So it was quite an interactive day, and people could go and talk to the characters, learn about their history, and then also connect with the work, I suppose. So one of the first time period that we started off with was the Egyptian room, where we had Hatshepsut, who is she's a pharaoh, but she's female. Usually pharaohs would be male, but she wanted to be known as a pharaoh as opposed to the Queen of the Nile. She's got a very interesting story of what she did for her people. So that was outside one room. The next room along we had was the Moorish Empire, which we had this character called Zirab. By his name it means black songbird. He was a really influential Moor who came over, I believe it was during the 13th century, maybe before that. But he brought over loads of traditions that we still use today, one of which being that we would change our clothing depending on the seasons. That was him. Crocodile shoes, that was him. Lutes, that was him. Even having the separate meals of starters, mains and desserts, that was also him. So very interesting. And then lastly we had Hannibal Barca, which you saw that he was doing like join Hannibal's army little thing. Used to be, he was always Hannibal Barca depicted as quite a European looking man, but now through research and finding coins that were from his time period, we actually now know that he looked more like this. So it was a really great day actually, the collaboration that we did with Toynbee Hall, because it was a chance for me to actually see our work being engaged by people, and would it work? Do people want to interact with this kind of work? And yes, they do. We had quite a large turnout of 80 people, which for my first event was quite a lot for me, which was nice. I would like to continue doing these sort of collaborations to, one, get the work out there, and also answer the question of, because I want to take my play to schools, how will this fit in with their curriculum? I understand obviously it will fit in regards to Black History Month that we're going to be coming up into, but how else will it fit into the curriculum? And that's the kind of conversation I want to start having with schools, to see when else we can do that and if we can do that. So as I'm sure all of you know, being in a multicultural society, all of these voices, they really need to be heard, and I feel that this play could be a positive way of trying to highlight our history and bring a sense of pride to our people. And I think in particular by starting with young people, we can start to change that narrative from a younger age, and instead of people like me going to avoid growing up, that we won't. We'll have young people who know their backstory, know their history, and are propelled forward into a future that's more well-rounded and centred. That's what we are doing. Thank you very much.
Hello. Thank you so much, Cristal. That is such fascinating stuff, and I want to call my son's school right now. He would love it so much. Thank you all for introducing your really quite diverse and fascinating projects. My first thought is how you all have the time, because it all involves so much work. I've got so many questions, but I'm not going to take chair's privilege until I feel like it. Okay, so does the audience.
I just wanted to ask just a couple of questions. One is to you, Julia, in a sense of how we can showcase these projects on your website, and really to encourage you and Thomas to perhaps keep these conversations going and having some sort of annual events or something, because I think it's so interesting to have some sort of hub where these conversations can happen, but also to highlight all the brilliant work these individuals are doing on this extremely innovative way of telling history and to the public and involving the public. So that's really but I wanted to come to you. Is it Cristal?
Yeah.
Fantastic, brilliant. So there are people, even though there's controversial institutions like my old institution, Oxford, and British Museum behind the scenes. There's so many people working to try and change the system.
I know that it's happening. I know it's happening. It's just happening slowly, and then it's also finding out what other places are doing the same thing, so that then I can collaborate. Because my main thing, which I didn't say, was trying to find funding. Like, I know there's funding out there, and there is the Arts Council, but that is it's a whole mission within itself, which I will take on at some point again. But where else can I find funding? I don't feel like it's something that's easily accessible to. Like, I've typed on the internet funding for, black theatre or whatever.
I mean, it kind of speaks to the question that you put to me, right? Because that is, the other way to get funding is to have it kind of radically channeled through a university project that you're partnering with. Because like that's how I see myself a lot of the time when I'm writing funding bids. I'm seeing myself as like a conduit as far as possible. Just like I will extract the money from the institution and give it as much as possible to the partners that I'm working with, and like the university will try everything to stop that being a smooth process, but it is possible. But like it's just one example of the kind of networking and support that we could have if there was a hub, so that there was a place where we could like get projects to list what they're doing, small sort of descriptions of it, link them together, let them know about funding workshops or like academics looking for project partners and stuff like that. It's a monumental undertaking. But I think with like a big enough team and some institutional support, it is possible.
I have a question for each group. Is that a bit greedy?
No. We got lots of time.
So the first one to Ellie and Laura, it was based on something that Laura said towards the end about the role that history plays in specifically the food that you put together. I think you said that it wasn't necessarily about teaching, so I'd be interested to hear more about what role history does play in that context. Olivia and Paula, I was interested about how your research for these tools is driven, how you define uncomfortable, I suppose, and whether that has changed over time. And Cristal, I'd just be interested to hear more about how the students, school children, have responded to the initiatives that you've presented to.
Well, I think I guess the point I was making was that for us it's been sometimes more useful to just do the same things but do it a bit more invisibly, so the history doesn't have to be necessarily in people's faces.
I think there's something in there about history as permission, history as a way of opening up people's own conversations about their lived experiences. And so rather than seeing the history as being completely front and centre, it's very important that it's there to facilitate a conversation or a dialogue and a sense of emotional connection between the two.
So the invite is not come in and learn about history, but come in and have an experience, and the stories from the past, I guess, is the history there. There's the kind of lots of little examples, lots of kind of ways of remembering from the past, kind of help people think through what that means for them, so they can engage with it in different ways and make it personal to them or not as they wish to. I guess that's the way it's working.
Yeah, we're also aware that we're dealing with grief and trauma as well, so trying to not be prescriptive about the depth that a participant might want to go into of their own. So there's a choice. You can engage quite lightly, but if you want a more profound engagement, there's the potential for that too.
Well, generally the research is actually driven by responses on the tours, and often responses by community members, because they'll be the ones who know the city the best and be like, oh, did you know about this plaque, or do you know about this wall that was built in North Oxford in the 30s to separate social housing from like mansions, and that's literally a wall dividing the street. Yeah, that's the wall. Yeah, it's such a weird history, but of course, if you're just living as a student of the university, you don't know that, and then we learn about it on our tour, then we do more research, and then we incorporated it into our materials. So it is very much driven by responses that we receive on the tours, also feedback. We collect a lot of feedback, and I mean, whoever fills the feedback forms, that's like 10% maybe of people actually attending our events. But we try to be very rigorous about it. And of course, we also organize a lot of events. So some things are doable as a walking tour, some things are not because of just the practicalities of a walking tour. And that's also why we have this kind of public lectures, discussion cafes, we have the articles, we have the podcast, so we try to go in a few different directions. The self-guided tours are just generally things that are a little bit outside of the city center, which would be a bit difficult to organize as a walking tour per se, and people can still use them to walk in their own neighborhoods. And as Paula said, we have at this point 8 different walking tours in Oxford, like 8 different routes, because initially we just had the one, and then people were like, oh, you should also talk about money in Oxford, funding. So we did one on money, then we have one on empire, we have one on history of medicine, which is such a fascinating history of ethics and medicine in Oxford. So we have many different tours, and we need to stop actually having new ones because it's just too many. But basically it is very much driven by feedback, and we also revise our content. So sometimes we're just like, okay, we're going to change our itinerary a little bit. So rather than having a new tour, just changing a little bit the contents and updating it just so that people could come back on the tour and have a different experience as well. And so for uncomfortable, Paula.
How do we define uncomfortable? I think the beauty of the term is we don't have to define it. It means something different in lots of different contexts, and it's very flexible. And so it can be taken to be meaning like it's uncomfortable to confront your own white privilege. It can be taken to mean it's uncomfortable to talk to people that you've never met before on the street. It's uncomfortable to state your opinion about a statue to people you've never met before. It could be just that it's uncomfortable to be standing out in the rain. Sometimes it is. And so the nice thing is it's a term that is quite flexible, and it can be taken to mean whatever I think whoever is participating wants it to mean something. And some people walk away thinking, wow, was I actually uncomfortable in that term, or was it just that I had to get past what I thought was uncomfortable, and I can actually have this conversation with my family or friends tomorrow. And that's kind of the nice thing. It's a very flexible word, so we do think it does a good job of kind of encapsulating what we do, because it's so open-ended and it's about interpretation.
Again, something being uncomfortable can be a bit productive, because then you have to go beyond this, as Paula said. So you kind of you have to go beyond this one step, or this feeling of oh, we're not really sure. And I mean, of course, we always give people the option to step out if they want to, and then there may be some topics on the tour that can be a bit uncomfortable, or quite uncomfortable as well. So when we go into some colonial atrocities and things like this, and we always leave participants, we tell participants that they can always step out at any point. So we're trying to make it also a very safe space for participants. Thank you for the question.
And yeah, in regards to how the young people were engaging with the work, they really did love it actually. The workshops in particular, because it was them being able to they could hear about the history, but then by doing something it kind of ingrained the magic of what history can do for people. We had a placard as well up for if people wanted to write post-it notes about their experience, and all of it was really positive, that yes, they'd like it to come to schools. There was a mailing list as well made for places that would want to be told when it's up and running. And also to see the historical figures come to life. Once again, it added another part of the magic to them. Just lots of positive feedbacks, more of when is it happening again, is it happening again, where can I find out more, lots of positive.
Sorry, just to follow that up, you explained that you were very fascinated by history as a child, and do you find that there's a kind of inherent interest amongst the young people that you're speaking to or working with, or do you find that some are more difficult to win over to that interest?
I think there's always going to be some students who aren't always wanting to engage in it, which I think will be much more easier to see when we actually can go to schools and can see the workshops as a group of people that not necessarily chose to come to the event. Because everyone who came to the event, they chose to be there and they wanted to engage in it. There wasn't so much of a struggle on the event. I feel like that kind of thing will be more when we go to schools. I think also as well it's going to be how it's interpreted. By having it through a play, it's not necessarily sit down, you listen, you write it down. It's going to be, it's come to life in their face, so it's not it's more like a fairy tale that then they can learn to love and listen to the information more and actually take it in as opposed to just listening. So I think, I'll be able to see that more when we go to schools. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very humbling. It's fascinating what you're doing. And I think what you just said, it's about doing. And that's what I love in public issue. It's about doing. I'm not saying that other institutions don't do things, but there is this production that I love, and you all do this. But it's very often on top of the other things that you have to do. So my question is related to your question about sustainability and how your network can help them. Because we don't have to keep every project. Sometimes we have to let go, and that's fine. But sometimes we don't want to let go. And I'm wondering how you could help them, and what would you need from the platform? Would it be to connect, to find funding? Because funding is, the nerve of the production. It's also time. Would that be useful? Or would that be something like co-application for funding? Because I think that's something we don't do enough, associating like institutions, universities, communities to write grants together so that we make it sustainable, and the communities also get money and resources. Would that be something that you would benefit from the network? So how can we make your network more sustainable from your needs? What would you need from Julia?
Well, personally, I would like both. So I think it's going to be a great knowledge to learn myself how to get funding without necessarily a university backing me. But I think also starting off maybe with having a collaboration with a society or a university that will definitely be able to help me personally, because I'm only just starting out now, and it's only just me as well. On how to get it going, and then being able to see the work firsthand, to then reflect on it and go, okay, how can we do it again? How can we make it better? So having both. You guys?
So funding is great, but we are a social enterprise, so we do tend to self-fund, which is a great benefit. But connection to other projects, like working potentially to connect you to local schools in Oxford, or working to find other projects doing similar things is always a great one for us, and the other community members that have like-minded kind of initiatives and plans. That's been really helpful for us.
Well, not really scaled along same lines, and it's also something just having knowledge of what exists, because I just felt, as you said, the Googling funding, heritage. It is difficult to know what exists, and there's always often this big kind of roadblock of like, oh, you need to be linked to this or that institution. So I think that it will be really, really helpful to find ways to connect better and just have a clear understanding of the funding possibilities.
I mean, the question wasn't really for me, but I think Julia's point really is really important. The more we can kind of have knowledge or share knowledge of academics who are really willing to do that work, to be that conduit, to go, do you know what, I can access this quite a lot, like a large amount of money, or there might be bits of money floating around the university, I can access that. So I guess I'm wondering, would it be helpful if there's a kind of list of academics, or to help you find, do you know what I mean? Help you find the right academics who are really willing to like find that 50 grand that could really make a difference.
Dating matching kind of thing.
Yeah. I full on would have started at this
Yeah. So how much can you give?
And I mean, like every time I hear about these absolutely incredible projects, three of which are represented here that are excellent examples of projects that make me go, this is exactly what we need. This is absolutely amazing stuff that the public wants, that absolutely the universities say they want. And it makes me so frustrated knowing that all of those projects are struggling for funding. Struggling to, and they're not asking for much, right? We're not talking high-speed rail here. And I just think there just also just needs to be more funding. Because my issue with setting up a website is that Birkbeck has no support money. And there's very little core funding. And I think that's part of the problem. There's very little funding for just to support institutions and organizations and individuals just from a core way. Like, here is some money for you to be able to eat. you know, while you're putting together your project and running your organization, and it's extremely frustrating, but you know, one of my things that I want to do is to locate as much of that kind of funding as I can. But I think it has to start with some kind of website. So after this network, I'm hoping to then go back to the project partners and actually co-opt everyone who was here, depending on what box they ticked for the GDPR. And you know, just try to pool some resources and see at least if we could get a website that connects people, and then just see if it can snowball out from there. But it's just so annoying because the amount of money required is actually not that much. But it's so difficult to find things like that will keep a website running for a decade, right? It's just like, why can't we find this kind of funding? But I try. It's one of the things I love to do is write funding bids, and so I'm going to keep trying. But there shouldn't be that many challenges in the way, and institutions, especially wealthier universities, should be falling over themselves to try to support projects like this. And hopefully, if enough of us keep demanding it, one of them will.
Just on that, I'm thinking about enterprise funding at my own institution. I feel like if we frame it as like, it's not history, it's enterprise, then maybe that's some of the way to get more money.
Yes.
Thank you all so much. I was really moved by all of your presentations, and I really like the emphasis on tactility and sensory experiences as part of this way of sort of doing public history. And going back to what Ellie said about this kind of ethics of being radically gentle, which I really love as a phrase. I think that's beautiful and kind of sits along sort of feminist politics of care and the ways in which those are enacted. I wondered if you had any other learnings about the ethics of engaging with the public through these forms of kind of quite playful, quite experiential forms of engaging with the past that you'd be willing to share with us, because it's really useful.
Do you want to go first? Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I suppose for me it's really important that we think about the endings of projects as well as the beginning. So, you know, I'm a practitioner that is project funded, so I live project to project, and we're often asked to justify, quite rightly, when applying to the Arts Council or different funding bodies, how we're going to like engage communities. And for me, of course, that's important, but we also need to think about how we ethically disengage communities when the funding runs out. Because at the moment, there's a bit of a rush to weaponize artists that have marginal identities, and we need to think carefully about how we can sustain those relationships, you know, like with the recent round of NPO applications for arts buildings. They're like, oh, Ellie, you're disabled, aren't you? Yeah, great. Let's grab you. And it starts to become like this very territorial bagsing of different communities, for want of a better phrase. So I think we need to think about ramps into projects and ramps out of projects, and what the legacy might be, and how to be very transparent with communities about what's possible. It's a very long answer.
I'll just add a tiny bit about, I guess you were getting at the sensory, the tactile, the emotional there, which I think is such a good way into learning new things, experience different things, and just creates a whole new, like, you know, smells. Like one of the things that Ellie put in the caravan were like rosemary twigs, which have long been associated with remembrance. There were lots of things to feel and touch, and it just allows a kind of broader way of experiencing it, and lots of different ways in. You know, kids love it. You know, those kids that just chucked their bikes down and ran in the caravan and started getting involved because it just. So I think, but obviously when you're doing that kind of quite immersive experience, there's obviously a lot of thinking to do about how to support people if they find that overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I think the grief series are great on that. From ask for a hug tokens, I think were in the caravan, was there something like that? Of like, do you know what, here's just, you don't even have to say anything, here's a way of like saying I need some support, and to making sure that they had all contacts in the areas that they were visiting around, like, you know, bereavement support and things like that. So it's really well thought out, and I think one other really great thing that worked really well was, that you do really well, Anu, is making sure the teams looked after as well. And I think researchers are really bad at this, actually, of like some good thinking around caring for participants, but not always very good thinking about you know, your tour guides, and I'd be interested to think what you do on it. But you guys do really good things like check-ins every day, like emotional check-ins of how everyone's doing, and I think that's really good because obviously unless the people who are running it are in a good place themselves and are in an okay space themselves, then you're not going to be able to support the participants.
Thank you. And I'll start with the check-in and how the guys are doing, because this is, you mentioned that, and it's absolutely something that's very much part of how we envision the training of the guide. Of course, there's all the content and you know many things, but most importantly, they are going to be alone on the street handling very complicated, complex conversations, and though we already have had people who are very, very extreme, they have been some outside heckling at times happening, or there can be like interruptions and things that get a little bit complicated. So it's very, very important for us to provide adequate training to our guides so that they know ways out or ways to diffuse those tensions, but also we check in with them. We check in after the tours to see if things have gone okay. And they also have a space to kind of share with us. We have like different processes in place where they can say if there is something that has happened during the tour, and then we try to, of course it's very different depending if it's an open tour where you have a lot of separate individuals who book. But we did have, for instance, this summer was a tour by a summer school in Oxford, and often summer schools do those big massive bookings of like 20 tours. In the summer there was an activity where the students to do, and quite often their tutors are not really aware of that and they just go along. And it was actually the tutor, the group leader of those teenagers, was very extremely derogatory towards the guide, and was always trying to challenge the guide at every single point. And that was, I think, quite difficult for the guide. And the guide brought to us right away after letting us know what happened. And we took action right away by contacting the summer school, saying that we will not run any other tours for them if that person was with the students. But it was actually very surprising because we expect those reactions from the open groups, but actually they happen sometimes when someone doesn't actually know what they booked on and they're just like, oh, this is an educational tour. And Paula, yes.
And just for the guides training, we do a 5-step training process for them, and they're really like guided through the whole way through, and they all have contacts with like mentors or senior junior guides. So there's a way to handle those moments where if they experience themselves having racist comments coming towards them, how to handle those and the experiences across the guides. So they have the support in place to try and handle those, and we have this really rigid training process to make sure that they're supported all the way through before they're thrown out as the solo guide for the first time, so that they really feel they're ready for it.
And for participants as well, because of course this can be also emotionally challenging for participants. So we do like highlight, we kind of make a big announcement at the start of the tour, and we kind of explain that it is a space for discussion and that we are going to disagree. And this is a tour where people will disagree, but we need to do it in a respectful way. So that this is like the condition to be on the tour, that you can absolutely disagree, but it needs to be respectful, otherwise the participant will have to leave the tour. And that's set from the outset. And of course, when there are particularly triggering topics, as I mentioned before, we announce it and we always tell people you can step out and just join again at the end of the stop, and have those kind of exit options along the route.
You've all said a lot of the stuff that I would have already put in place. I do think that check-ins and check-outs are definitely really crucial, especially just when you're dealing with history in general. I think on one of the handouts that say that history is really quite, it can be quite, not a touchy subject, that you're going to have lots of differing opinions about things. So I think it's really crucial to check in at the beginning of either a workshop or whatever you're doing, set expectations, and then at the end have checkouts so that everyone feels included and feels that they've gone along with this journey with you, as opposed to being taken along for the ride. Yeah.